the dawn of a new nation, forged in unity and fragile compromise. Welcome to History Through Questions, where we put decision makers, key players in the era of good feelings, in the hot seat.
Welcome to History Through Questions. I'm your host, and today we are diving into one of the most controversial elections in American history, a race where the people made their choice and the government made a different one. In 1824, 4 men ran for President of the United States, all 4 from the same political party. No clear sides, no obvious villain, just 4 powerful men who each believed they were the right choice. When the votes were counted, one of them came out on top. Andrew Jackson had won more votes than any other candidate. By every account, he had won. But the Constitution had a rule that almost nobody had thought about until that moment. Winning the most votes wasn't enough. You had to win a majority. With 4 candidates splitting the country, nobody got there. So the decision moved out of the hands of voters and into the House of Representatives. The most powerful man in that room was Henry Clay, a politician who had just finished 4th in the race. Under the Constitution, that meant he was out of the running entirely. But he controlled the floor, and whoever controlled the floor controlled the outcome. 6 weeks later, the House voted. John Quincy Adams became president. 3 days after that, Clay was named Secretary of State, the same office that had launched every president who came before him. We found all 3 men, and we asked them on the record what happened. This is the corrupt bargain, and before we're done, you're going to have to decide for yourself whether it actually was one.
I want you to understand what was actually at stake in 1824, because I don't think the general's supporters ever truly grasped it. Andrew Jackson was a war hero. I will grant him that freely. His victory at New Orleans had been remarkable. But admiring a man's courage on a battlefield is a very different thing from trusting him with the most complex office in the world. History had already shown us what happens when a military man with a short temper is given unlimited power. I had no intention of letting that happen to this republic. John Quincy Adams and I shared a vision for what this country could become. Roads connecting the frontier to the coast, canals opening up trade, a real economic future built on more than land and war. Jackson had none of that. Jackson had a campaign and a grievance.
Mr. Clay believed the American people had made a mistake, that they had been swept up in battlefield glory and didn't understand what they were really voting for. What he could never seem to accept was that they understood exactly what they were voting for, and they chose me anyway. They went to the polls and they made their choice. They looked at every man in that race and they cast their votes. And when it was over, I had more of those votes than anyone else on the ballot, by a significant margin. In both the popular count and the Electoral College, not a close second, more. 6 letters, 1 word, more. They weren't voting for a family name or a cabinet connection. They were voting for someone who actually looked like them. Someone who had built everything he had with his own hands and hadn't been handed a thing. That was what Mr. Clay could never seem to understand about this country, no matter how many years he spent in it.
General Jackson spoke a great deal about what the people wanted. The Constitution did not ask what the people wanted, it asked what the law required. And the law was followed to the letter. The House of Representatives elected me President of the United States on the first ballot, 13 state delegations voting in my favor. That is the constitutional process. That is precisely how the founders designed the system to function when no candidate wins an outright majority. I followed it exactly as any man in my position was obligated to do. When I formed my cabinet, I appointed Henry Clay as Secretary of State because his record in Congress had been exemplary, because the Western states deserved a voice in my administration. Those were the reasons. They were sufficient, and they were the only reasons.
Yes, I was appointed Secretary of State. And yes, I accepted. I had earned that position through 30 years of public service. I had turned down cabinet appointments before when it suited me, which is something my accusers never seemed to mention. If accepting a position you were qualified for constituted a corrupt bargain, then I supposed everyone in Washington was guilty of something. I looked my conscience in the eye before I made that decision. The knaves cannot comprehend how a man can be honest, but that is their failure, not mine.
A man of conscience. That's how he described himself. Let me tell you what that conscience looked like from where I was standing. What I argued against was what had happened inside that house, behind those closed doors. In the weeks between the election and the vote, Henry Clay came to me first. He sent a man named James Buchanan. a congressman who would one day become president himself, to find me with an offer. Back Clay's political agenda, and Clay would make sure the House voted my way. I told Buchanan to leave. I did not make those kinds of arrangements, and I never had. Clay then walked across the hall and made the same offer to John Quincy Adams. Adams did not send him away. 3 days after the House voted, Clay was handed the Secretary of State's office, the same position that had put Jefferson in the presidency, and Madison, and Monroe. Everyone in Washington knew what that office meant. Every single one of them.
I had heard the general's account. I will say only this. I had been warned that my enemies would construct exactly this kind of story. I had been warned before the appointment was ever made. That warning was noted, and the appointment was made anyway. Because a president who allows his enemies to dictate his decisions is not a president. He is a puppet. I did not take that office to be managed by men who had lost. It is true that General Jackson won more votes than I did. I never disputed that. What he did not win was a majority, and in this system, those two things are not the same. They have never been the same.
In this system. That was what he kept saying. In this system. As if the system and the deal were two different things. The Judas of the West has closed the contract. That was what I called it, and that was what I meant. They handed him 30 pieces of silver and called it a cabinet appointment. And every person in this country who had been paying attention could see exactly what it was. They didn't take the presidency from me. I could survive losing. What they took was the voice of every American who walked to that polling place believing their vote meant something. And I promise you, the people have very long memories.
No one was ever charged. No investigation ever returned a verdict. Clay demanded a congressional inquiry to clear his name, and it went nowhere. In 1828, Jackson ran again and won in a landslide. History remembered it the way Jackson named it, the corrupt bargain, and that name stuck because people believed it. But I want you to sit with the question he never really answered. Was it a corrupt bargain, or was it just smart politics? Drop your answer in the comments. A for corrupt bargain, B for smart politics. And check the comments for resources to take this case further. We'll see you next time on History Through Questions.